Hello, everybody, and welcome. My voice still isn't back at 100%, but we're going to try to do this anyway. Forgive me, I'm still hacking and sneezing and congestion quite a bit here as we recover from that disease. So if you'll bear with me, then hopefully we can get through this together. We've got the Civil War amendments that we'll be discussing this evening, but we'll start off first with the 11th and 12th amendments. We'll give people a minute or two to get in here, and I'm sure that the notification just went out. But let's see who we've got. We got South Florida DCL. We've got Pat Butler and Diana too, and Little Lone Prepper. Hello. Little Lone Prepper, I did check on that, and that is Swanson's. So I was correct about that. So yeah, that's available. I know it's available in our grocery store here and at Walmart. So you should be able to find that. It's just a little bitty 14-ounce can that you can use. And that's what I lived on in college, by the way, that and chili. So let me see. Yeah, we've got 7 people on board right now. Well, we're getting there. Just another minute or two, and then we'll get going. Gosh, there's all kinds of exciting stuff going on around the world. Unbelievable. Celtic Grandma, hello. Triple G Farms, hello. Welcome. So Diana, earlier today, we still have 60-mile-an-hour crosswinds. Really, really bad. We probably got an inch in about half an hour earlier today. We're supposed to continue to get rain, and they're calling it heavy drizzle. But that was a pretty heavy drizzle. But it's been pretty bad. We're not supposed to have a freeze until Friday, but we do have winter storm warnings for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So possibility of freezing rain and or snow. So Triple G, yes, we are. We've got 60-mile-an-hour winds down here. I'm sure you've got the same up there. I was talking with Pete from the Roaming Prepper earlier this evening out in Odessa, and they've got 60 to 75-mile-an-hour winds there as well. And but that turns into dust out there because there's nothing to block it, and it's all dust. Then have a niece in Amarillo, and they are under winter storm advisory this evening. So they're expecting up to 6 inches of snow this evening. So the Panhandle looks like it's going to get it pretty rough this evening. My daughter got 12 inches overnight last night in New Jersey. So not last night, not before last, I think it was. But yeah, it looks like we've got a lot of stormy weather hitting the U.S. And so, remember, this was kind of predicted. This is going to be one of those extremely bad winter storms or an extremely bad winter. That's what I want to say. Let me take my mic off so I don't blow you out. Okay. Hopefully I didn't offend too many people. But I forgot what I was going to say. But anyhow, I did do a video on keeping your house warm during a winter storm if you lose power. And I talked about the InstaFire Vesta, which is the space heater. I talked about some alcohol tabletop burners that you can get to keep your house warm. Putting charcoal and bricks in a burner outside in your grill, warming the bricks up, bringing those inside and putting them on your stove or on your door to your oven. Then, of course, there's the butane single burner stove. You want to be careful with open burners, open flames. Hot water bottles are going to be critical. Hand warmers. I've gotten in 2 cases of hand warmers here in the last couple months, getting prepared for this eventuality. So there's all kinds of things you can do. Make sure you're creating small microclimates. If you lose power, you won't be able to warm your entire house. Pick one room. And for us, it's going to be the kitchen area, simply because we can continue to have the Kelly kettle out in the backyard over the grill, along with some bricks, and then I've got some steel buckets. Put bricks inside the steel buckets, bringing them in. You've got residual heat from the hot bricks on the oven door, and then while those are cooling down, then I've got other bricks out in the backyard. So we're going to be able to change those out. So as these cool down, we bring the hot ones in, take the cold ones out, and rewarm those. Then we've got the Kelly kettle we'll keep over that fire as well, so it will always have hot water for the hot water bottles. So I think we got it pretty well covered. So, just start thinking, what can you do? Stray Kitten, welcome. Yeah, there are 2 hotel explosions. One of them is in Fort Worth. They're saying that it was faulty piping for the gas line. So it was a gas explosion. There's also another explosion at a hotel in Baghdad. And it was just kind of coincidental that both of them would happen at the same time. But we do have 2 major hotel explosions. Evidently, the Fort Worth, I follow a guy called TNS, Texas News Network, TNS News. And he's out of Dallas, Fort Worth, and but he was covering that fairly exclusively as far as what was going on with the explosion there at the I want to say it was the Sandman Hotel in Fort Worth. But anyhow, yeah, that's been determined. Major triage incident, lots of people injured and burnt. But that has been they have found the cause of that to be a faulty gas line. So it was a natural gas explosion. Okay, let's get into the 11th through 11th through 15th Amendments to the Constitution. So the 11th Amendment was passed on February 7th, 1795, and it says the judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state. So basically, the Supreme Court doesn't have any authority over any lawsuits that were existing prior to the adoption or the ratification of the Constitution. 12th Amendment. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. And they shall name in their ballots the person voted for as president, and in distinct ballots the person voted for as vice president. So this says we're supposed to have 2 different elections, one for president, one for vice president. But recently, I'm going to say the 20th century especially, we kind of amalgamated the 2 so that was a party ticket, president and vice president. If you look back, you'll find that historically, up through the middle of the 19th century, you actually had a president and vice president, and in several circumstances, they were of opposite parties. So that's when they used to do it that way. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be president if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person have such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having 1 vote. A quorum for the purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all states shall be necessary to make a choice. And if the House of Representatives shall not choose a president whenever the right of choice shall devolve upon them before the 4th day of March the next following, then the vice president shall act as president, as in the case of the death or constitutional disability of the president. The person having the greatest number of votes as vice president shall be the vice president if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And if no person have a majority, then from the 2 highest numbers on the list, the Senate shall choose the vice president. So the House of Representatives chooses, in the case of a tie, the president. The Senate chooses the vice president. Okay. And a quorum for the purpose shall consist of 2/3 of the whole number of senators, and a majority of the whole number shall be necessary to a choice. But no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. So, in order to be president of the United States, you have to be 35 years old, and you have to be a natural-born citizen of the United States. The way that's been interpreted by Supreme Court decisions, 6 of them, is your parents must both be residents or citizens of the United States at the time of your birth. You have to be born in the United States. So those are the requirements. 35 years of age, born in the United States, and both your parents citizens of the United States at the time of your birth. So that means that since the vice president assumes the duties of president upon the incapacity of the president, that the vice president has to fulfill the same obligations to be the president as the president does. And you are absolutely right, Devil Dog. Absolutely right. I think they focused way too much on his birth certificate, and they should have focused on the fact that neither of his fathers, his natural father nor his adopted father, were U.S. citizens at the time of his birth. Okay, now we get into what's called the Civil War amendments. And so all 3 of these were passed after the Civil War, or as we call it, the War of Northern Aggression. So Amendment 13, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime. Now remember, there are those who say that the 4th Amendment prohibits things like chain gangs and other forced labor if you're in a prison, because it's unnecessary. What do they call it? Let me get back to the 4th Amendment here. Is it the 4th or the 6th? Doggone. Let me see. Cruel and unusual punishment. There we go. They say that working on chain gang is cruel and unusual punishment, but the 13th Amendment specifically authorizes it, and that's after the 4th. So, but anyhow, where any party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So basically, the 13th Amendment did away with all slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States, and there's no questions asked about free states or slave states or anything else. 14th Amendment. So this is very appropriate. This is coming up a lot right now. And we'll have a little bit of a discussion about it because there are 2 states, Maine and Colorado, who believe that this amendment prohibits President Trump from being on the ballot for the 2024 election. So there's 5, I believe there's 5 sections to it. Yeah, 5 sections. Section 1, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's going to become important when we talk about Section 4, okay? Nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Section 2, representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to the respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. But when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for president and vice president of the U.S., representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof, is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such state being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. So this is basically amending the 3/5 rule. If you'll remember, in Article 1, it talks about we have a representative for each person over 21, each male over 21 in that state. So it's based upon the number of citizens, okay? Except for people who are indentured servants or in slavery, then they have basically each one of those counts for 0.6 or 3/5 of a person in population. So that means that for every 5 slaves or every 5 indentured servants, you only had 3 citizens counted as citizens in the enumeration for representation by a representative. This section 2 changes that. It says everybody who is a male over 21 gets to be counted for purposes of enumerating how many representatives you want to have for that state. Now, there are going to be 2 subsequent amendments that will further amend this one. So we have women's suffrage, which says that that also includes women who have the right to vote. And then we have the 26th Amendment, I believe it's the 26th, that changes the voting age from 21 to 18. Yeah, 26th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged. And then women's suffrage is 24th Amendment. Okay, so we've got both the women and the 18-year-olds are added to that later on as we get further into this. Section 3, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So this is the section that's being used by Colorado, Minnesota, and now there are a couple other states that are trying to do it, and I think that the Supreme Court is going to have to make a decision on this. So let me get up here, and I see a question that may be appropriate to this. Let me get up here. Let me get my mouse working, because for some reason it just likes to stick me on this and not allow me to scroll around in the comments. Come on, mouse, catch up with me here. There we go. Okay. Why do the states of Maine and Colorado get to make the decision versus the federal government or courts? Good question, Cats and Prepping. Very appropriate question. So here, let's take a look at what it says. What does it say? Number 1, it says, to support the Constitution of the United States, which he did, shall have engaged in an insurrection. So number 1, they're saying that that day, 2 days ago, 3 years ago, was an insurrection. Usually an insurrection has an armed group trying to take over the government, right? There were no arms. Nobody was armed. And as a matter of fact, all kinds of evidence is coming out now. There were at least 200 FBI agents inside the crowd that were stirring them on. We have video now that's been exposed now that the House is controlled by a different party that they're beginning to show. This shows the Capitol Police saying, come this way, this door's open, encouraging people to come in. Another question, they've got one where there's a guy on the steps of the Capitol that says, come on, Antifa, let's go. And so the question is, Antifa and BLM had counter-protested every single time there was any kind of a Trump gathering in the 3-4 years prior, but there were no Antifa or BLM seen anywhere near the Capitol. But yet you've got this one guy yelling to this crowd saying, "Come on, Antifa, let's go." So obviously they were being subversives inside the crowd itself. So number one, is it an insurrection? Okay. Now let's define what an insurrection is. It's an attempt to take over the government. I think that they were there to intimidate, but I don't think they were there to take over. My personal opinion, I think that, so that's, we can argue that till the cats come home. But, just different people have different opinions. So the other part is, or rebellion, and there was no rebellion. A rebellion requires that it be armed as well. So then let's go back to the first section, and it says, nor shall any deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So we are basically depriving a person of their liberty, saying they are being accused of having done this without having been convicted of it, and there has been no due process of law. If there has been a conviction, I could say I could probably support it, but there still has not been a conviction. There's only assertions that something wrong was done. There have been no convictions. And so that's where I have a problem with the entire thing is, we supposedly have an issue here in the U.S. That says that a person is innocent until convicted, but with the exception of President Trump, and then he's convicted until we find the crime to convict him of. How's that? So can I reread the part about helping the enemy? Yes, I can. So it says, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. So that would be giving aid or comfort to the anybody who is in insurrection or rebellion. So there's another famous clause, and it says, and it's, this is a famous saying, and it says, to the victor goes the spoils. So victors get the right history. Okay. Well, you have a point there. I can't disagree with that. Pat Miller says she's buffering. Anybody else? I'm looking good on my end. So you have a very valid question, Triple G. I don't think the Supreme Court will uphold it because this is a case of holding a person accountable for a crime of which they have not yet been convicted. So until there's a conviction, there's only an assertion. But what we have to do is we have to take a look at what was the intent of the 14th Amendment. So the intent of the 14th Amendment was, remember, that to the victor goes the history, and they get the right history, they get to write everything else. So was there an insurrection in 1861? What happened? 13 states did not try to take over control of the U.S. government. They had no intention of taking over the U.S. government. They said, we have guaranteed under the 10th Amendment our right as a state to make decisions on what goes on inside our state, states' rights. You are depriving us of our states' rights. Therefore, we are leaving this union. Okay? They had no intention to take over the U.S. government. They wanted to leave the U.S. government and form their own government, separate and distinct from the U.S. government. That is not an insurrection. That is not a rebellion. That is a secession. Okay? Totally different. So there was an enclave, a military post at Fort Sumter and South Carolina, and the southern states, the Confederacy, asked the North. They said, "You have this Fort Sumter as still being active in South Carolina, we would like for you to depart immediately, and we will allow transport in to evacuate it, but we don't want your fort on our property. Well, they sent down warships, basically, to reinforce Fort Sumter. So that's considered the beginning of the War of Northern Aggression, because remember, Fort Sumter was the shot basically that started what a lot of people would call the Civil War. That's what it's called because the North won the war. But anyhow, that was an incursion into sovereign territory of the Confederacy by the federal government. And that's what basically got the armed conflict started, if you will. So what they get to do is at the end of it, when we get together, oh gosh, I'm sorry. So everybody says that they're buffering out. I'm not showing it at my end. I'm sorry. Let's come back to that thought here in just a minute. So what they wanted to do was they wanted to punish anybody in the South from being able to hold laws unless they approved of them. And that's that 2/3 overriding authority by both houses of Congress. So if they like you, okay, and you support the president and the existing government of the North, then they can, of course, give you an exception to the rule and you can be elected to national office. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence says you have a duty to overthrow a government that has become destructive. Yes, but that isn't the case in 1861. They didn't say they wanted to overthrow the government. Okay, that's also not the case of 2000 or 2001. They did not say that they wanted to overthrow the government. In neither case did that happen. In the case of 1860, they said we want to secede, we want to leave the Union and form our own government. In 2021, they said, we would like for you to consider recounting the votes and whether or not your votes for the other person are valid or not. So it was not an attempt to overthrow the government. But the Declaration of Independence does say that. I'm sorry, that must be, the buffering has to be because of the storms around me. I'm very, very sorry for that. Cats and prepping, you are absolutely correct. So they're the ones who say that they're on the right side and we are on the wrong side. I believe that's true. I believe you're right, Theoxerus. But then they're going to be, my personal opinion, I don't care who gets elected this year in 2024. The results will not be accepted by the other side. I don't care who gets elected. Best 88 cents you can spend. 88 cents for a liter at Walmart for flavored carbonated water. Little Lone Prepper says she's going to close out and come back, and sometimes that helps. I hope so, Diana, too. I really do hope so. There's been a lot of false accusations and false testimony, false imprisonment, a lot of that stuff. So I agree with you. I think that that's going to be the case. But first, you have to have a court that's willing to hear you. So, that's going to be part of that issue. Yes, and so so the question becomes one of if so the question of insurrection and rebellion that's under the 14th Amendment. I'm not sure if those could be used against President Biden. However, his dereliction of duty as far as the control of the southern border. This thing that's going on right now with the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, him having elective surgery and nobody knew about it, and then evidently he had extreme pain New Year's Eve and was readmitted to ICU. Even his deputy did not know that he was in ICU. The president didn't know he was in ICU. The Strategic National Security Council did not know he was in ICU. Nobody knew that he was incapable of making any decisions. His deputy was on vacation in Puerto Rico and did not know that she was the acting Secretary of Defense. I mean, you talk about a cacophony of errors. This is one of those domino effects that says, hey, somebody's going to have to pay for this, because we basically for the last 2 weeks have not had civilian leadership at the Department of Defense. So even though we've had major turmoil going on in Yemen and the Houthis and the Straits of Yemen and the Straits of and the Red Sea, and oh my gosh, there's so much going on that for him not to have it would be something else. So let's take a look once again at the 14th Amendment, Section 3, and let's talk about the intent of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So it had two intentions. Number one, to outlaw slavery, which we probably should have done at the time of the adaptation of the Constitution, the ratification in the first place. However, we knew that the southern states would not ratify it if slavery was abolished, because they were so dependent upon slave labor in a more agrarian society than was the North, that was more of a manufacturing society. So in order to get the states, all 13 of them, to ratify the Constitution in the first place, they had to allow for slavery. And then they tried to get it through as one of the first amendments, but then the original 13 amendments that went through, only 10 of them got passed, and that's called the Bill of Rights. Then later we had the subsequent amendments. 11th and 12th, of course, were two of those that got ratified fairly quickly thereafter. And then the 13th, 14th, and 15th are the Civil War amendments that got passed after the War of Northern Aggression. So Section 4, the validity of public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss of emancipation of any slave, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. So basically what this says is any debts that were incurred by the North to force the reaccession of the South into the U.S. and negating their secession is valid and shall be paid. But any compensation for loss of slaves, any compensation to the states, or for war damages, for any war debt, for any private company that provided anything to the southern states in part of that war, those debts are null and void. They're declared illegal. So basically, to the victor go the spoils, right? To the victors go the money as well. Then we have Section 5. Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. So one of the things that happened was General Grant and Johnson not so much as Grant. Grant knew. See, Grant and Lee were classmates at West Point. And so one of the things he knew was that there was this intense loyalty, and this was very common until the 17th Amendment. It was extremely common to be far more loyal to your state than you were to the United States, okay? And so you'll even see during the Civil War, you talk about the 17th Maine and the 21st Massachusetts. And so you start talking about these regiments, and they were referred to by the state that they came from, okay? Not as a U.S. Army unit, but as a state Army unit. So the loyalties up until the 17th Amendment were primarily to the states. And that's part of the 10th Amendment, okay? The supremacy clause of the 10th Amendment. That anything that's not specifically delineated in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution is thereby reserved to the states, okay? So the states had more power than the federal government. And so Grant understood that. And he understood that a lot of his fellow classmates at West Point, U.S. Military Academy, were loyal to their states. Even though they were loyal to the U.S., they had their loyalty to their states, which was the case of General Lee. General Lee was actually offered by President Lincoln the job that Grant would have, okay, as the commander-in-chief of the Northern armies. But his loyalty was to Virginia, so he went to Virginia first. And then, so there was this thing about they wanted to reconcile. They wanted to have reconciliation so that even though they defeated the South, they wanted the South to come back and join back in and be part of the North. So as part of that reconciliation, they said, there are two things we're going to do. Number one, we understand that your citizens fought on behalf of your state, and we're going to afford them recognition as a true, valid soldier who fought for what they believed in, okay? So that's where we have a lot of the Confederate soldiers things and memorials and things like that. The second part of that is that we are going to allow you to retain the names of your heroes as the names of the forts that there are in the South. So northern forts that are in the north, Fort Devens, Fort George G. Meade, Fort Leonard Wood, Fort, all these forts are named after famous northern generals. In the South, in order to try to bring them back into the fold with reconciliation, they said, we'll allow you to keep the names of your famous generals as the names of your forts. Hood, Bliss, Benning, Stewart. So you've got all these different forts in the South that were named after Confederate generals until 2021, 2022, when Lloyd Austin single-handedly decided that reconciliation no longer applied and that it was offensive to Black soldiers to have any of the forts in the South named after Southern generals. Therefore, he, under his authority, changed the name. So Fort Hood no longer exists. It's now Fort Cavazos. Fort Benning no longer exists. It is now Fort Howell G. Moore. I can kind of agree with that. If they had broached that a different way, if they had said, we want to acknowledge General Moore, and we're going to, and since he was basically the first major combatant, and he was made famous, by the way, in a movie by, what's his name? He did The Patriot and Braveheart. What's his name? Anyhow, he told the story of General Moore when he was a battalion commander, lieutenant colonel in the Iadrang Valley, and the name of the movie was called "We Were Soldiers." And by the way, the helicopter pilot who was the medevac pilot for that battle went in 5 times under heavy armed fire. Snake, I forget his name. His call sign was Snake. Gosh, what was his name? He got the Medal of Honor for that, by the way. It was one of the first medals of honor given in the Vietnam conflict. Let me see. Let me catch up here with the chat. Okay. Because they didn't see secession as being valid. They thought it was an insurrection. That's the way they wanted it to be. And you'll find out that quite often, victors get to declare what they want as far as the things that are good there. Yeah, May 28th, 2020, Minneapolis Precinct 3, the only police precinct in the history of the United States to be totally gutted, burnt to the ground, evacuated. I mean, that was an insurrection, okay? If you want to see what an insurrection is, that was Minneapolis, May 28th, 2020. Was it 20 or 21? But anyhow, that was an insurrection. Uh, let's see where we are. And loyalties and identities. I'm a Virginian, you're a Texan, as opposed to Americans. I got in trouble for that during an inspection in the barracks when I was in the 1st Ops Battalion, Field Station Augsburg, 1978, I want to say. We had just gotten into brand new, what they called Volar furniture, and I was in the enlisted bachelor enlisted quarters. So I was in NCO quarters in comparison to the soldiers who lived in barracks. And so I had a private room and everything. It was really nice. We had a kitchenette that, NCOs live a little bit better than the enlisted do, than the lower grades, let's put it that way. So they wanted to show off the new volunteer Army stuff, and they knew that I was a mid worker. So I worked usually from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and would sleep until 3, and then I would leave at 3 o'clock. And I was going to night school, taking college classes and everything else. So the colonel asked if he could use my room and show it to the commanding general of the Women's Army Corps, who was going to come through and do an inspection. Well, and it just so happens, hello, Scott Hummer, welcome. It just so happened it was my day off that she came. So I had just finished and was getting ready to leave my room. And actually, they're a little bit more sordid story than that. But anyhow, they came into my room, and on my wall locker, I had a Texas flag, I had a Confederate flag, and I had a U.S. flag. And so the colonel looked at me. So I've got a colonel and a brigadier general. And he says, isn't the U.S. flag supposed to be on top? And I said, well, I go in priority. I go in the priority of my loyalties. So I'm a Texan first, then a Southerner, and then an American. And did I get in trouble for that? But I still feel that way. I am a Texan first. And, so I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and bear true faith and allegiance to the same. I will uphold that oath. But I still, I'm number one thinking of Texas, number two thinking of the South, and then number three of the rest of the country. I really don't affiliate with California or Massachusetts or Washington or Oregon. Those guys can have a San Andreas fault for all I care. Okay, so I said hello to Scott, Triple G. Yeah, Fort Lee, Virginia. Absolutely right, Cats and Prepping. I forgot about that. And you know that Mel Gibson, thank you, Scott Hummer. Thank you. And you do realize that it was General Lee's property that they turned into Arlington National Cemetery. So that was his personal property that they turned into Arlington National Cemetery. Well, I have orders. Assigning me to Fort Hood twice. So I guess I've never been assigned to Fort Hood since it no longer exists. But I always like to tell, since I live, 1 hour away from Fort Hood, if we go up to the commissary there and I run into some old people, one of the things I tell them, I was assigned to Fort Hood for 6 years and never stepped foot on it. So the first time I was assigned to the 303rd ASA Battalion, Fort Hood, Texas, with duty at NSA, the National Security Agency, Fort Meade, Maryland. And then the second time in 1977, ASA, Army Security Agency, and MI, Military Intelligence, merged into one, and it became known as INSCOM, Intelligence and Security Command. So I was assigned to the 303rd MI Battalion, Fort Hood, Texas. So it changed from ASA Battalion to MI Battalion with duty at the United States Army Intelligence Center and School, Goodfellow Detachment, Goodfellow Air Force Base, Texas. So I was assigned there for 6 years, and both times I was assigned to another post, one post and one base for the duration of my assignment at Fort Hood. So I'm probably one of the few people that have 6 years assigned to Fort Hood and 0 time on Fort Hood itself. Let me see here. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Although I do think the Supreme Court is probably going to fast track this. I have a feeling we'll probably have a decision on it. I'm going to say within the next 60 days. They will intervene and have a decision. Now, what's going to be interesting is the vote. Will it be a 5-4 or will it be a 9-0? It should be a 9-0, but I have a feeling it's going to be partisan lines again, and it'll end up being a 5-4. I do too. Yes. So people always ask me where I'm from, and I always tell them Texas. Ich bin ein Texaner. So yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at the 15th Amendment, and then we can pretty much wrap it up. So 15th Amendment, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And then Section 2, the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So this is basically giving the freed slaves the right to vote. Okay. Now notice it says on account of race or color. So I have an interesting question, and you're going to have to help me with this. We had biological race up until, I'm going to say, maybe the late 70s, and then all of a sudden we have this new artificial term called African American. So if you take a look at Title VII, we basically have no person can be deprived based on race, color, creed, national origin, gender, religion. I forget what the 7th category is. But anyhow, when we say African American, what is that? Is that a race? So if African American is a race, that means that somebody who's currently in Kenya, okay, of that race is African American. Is that true? I don't think so. I have a friend when I was in HR work, HR consulting, and his dad, he was born in the Canary Islands. His dad was prior to 1963. I'm sorry, 1961. His dad was the Cuban ambassador to the Canary Islands. So he was born in the Canary Islands. And so he's Hispanic, but he was born in Africa. But he's a U.S. citizen. So does that make him an African American? Since he was born in Africa and is an American, does that make him an African American? So this whole concept of African American, Elon Musk, absolutely, Diana, too. He's African American. So, we've got to quit playing with these words and changing the meanings of things because we change them so often to such a great extent that they no longer have any value whatsoever. And, we need to go back to just using the biological terminology. And, what my race, if they ask me for my race and it has white, I'll say, no, that's not my race. That's my color. My race is Caucasian. So I'm a very strict interpreter of the categories, and that they need to be in the way that they were intended originally. And, that's just the way we need to be. Yeah, the free state of Texas, absolutely. I say the Federal Independent Republic of Texas. So the FERT. And I haven't seen the Timu ads, so you'll have to help me with that one. But anyhow, so basically the 15th Amendment gave the right to vote to the freed slaves, to the freed indentured servants. Remember that there were still several of the Irish famine and Italians and some North African Arabs who had come over as indentured servants. And so when they were freed, they were also given the right to vote. So that's included in that overall group. So basically, this evening we covered the 11th through the 15th commandments. 14th commandment, section 3, is what they're trying to use to keep President Trump off the ballots, but he has not yet been convicted. Let's go back to where somebody said, well, there are other states that may try to do the same thing to President Biden. So I think that they can't use the 14th Amendment, okay? But there are other things. Remember that an impeachable offense is high crimes and misdemeanors. And so, of course, with his, if they say that he is committing an act of treason by not protecting our borders against illegal immigration and invasion, then that can definitely be used as a charge against them to keep him off a ballot. But once again, I'm kind of a stickler here. Charging him doesn't do any good. To me, a charge is nothing. He has to be convicted. We are a country, and in our country, we say that a person is innocent until convicted by a jury of their peers. So until President Trump is convicted, until President Biden is convicted, they are, for all intents and purposes, to be treated as innocent. And that goes for both of them. So I don't care which clause you want to use, which amendment you want to use. Both of them are innocent until they are convicted in court, whether that be the Senate acting as a court for impeachment, or whether it be a judicial court for the charges that are currently up against President Trump. Let me see. Yes, they are. And I disagree with that. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. Huh. That's strange. That is so true. If you change the language, you can change the logic. Absolutely true, Diana, too. And I think that's what's been happening here for quite a while. If you'll notice, we do that around some other political topics. So we talk about the right to choose versus the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So there's another body involved, and that other body is being deprived of its life. And so we have a guaranteed right, the right to life, versus an implied right, the right to choose a medical procedure for your own body. So which one takes precedence? The one that's a guarantee in the Constitution, or the one that's implied? Okay. So, and then we see also the other twisting of that. In 1972, the decision was made to grant a right. Now, there was no valid reason to grant the right under Roe v. Wade. So they granted a right under Roe v. Wade that there was no precedent and nothing in the Constitution that gave them the authority to grant that right. Okay. So then when it was taken away, they're saying, well, we're being deprived of our rights. Well, it was a right that had no reason to exist in the first place. So, and that's the whole reason that it was overturned, was because there was no legal basis for that in the very first place. So therefore, the court made a decision that they weren't authorized to make. So we can see how that terminology is once again coming up. And so it's the point of view of which one is it? Is it right to choose, or is it right to life? And so that's going to be, I think that's going to be one of the major factors in the 2024 election. You're going to see that come up an awful lot. It's going to be presented more by the left than it will be by the right. But that's the way it is. There's a graveyard in town whose gravestones state citizen of the Republic of Texas. Yep. And we're only 60 miles apart. So same thing here. Let me see. Oh, no, stray kitten. I'm so sorry. Okay, so that's where we are from the 16th to the 20th Amendments. What questions do you have before we shut this down for this evening? Now, tomorrow night, we're going to get into basically discussing, what's it called? Understanding the Threat in this book, Grid Down, Death of a Nation. So that's Hallerman's presentation to Congress on the potential effects of an EMP attack against the United States. South Korea withdrew from their 2018 agreement with North Korea, and so things are getting really hairy on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea has now had 2 or 3 successive days of attacks on Pyongyang Island, several hundred artillery and rocket strikes on the island. And I think that South Korea withdrew from that agreement because it says that they, won't get involved in any kind of a conflict with North Korea. And I think that their withdrawal from it is just saying, nope, we reserve the right to defend our people. Now, remember, one of the things that's very difficult for most Americans to remember is that Seoul is within 152 millimeter artillery range of the North-South Korean border. So anytime that they want to, the North can start wreaking havoc on Seoul. And it is one of the 25 largest cities in the world. Beautiful city, but it is one of the 25 largest. So, look for that to possibly erupt here in the near future as well. Okay, Devil Dog Prepper, good to see you. Have a nice evening. See you tomorrow night. So, yes, and I strongly recommend you read Mark Levin's book on the amendments that he proposes if we have a constitutional convention. And remember, there are 2 ways that we can have a constitutional amendment. The first one is the Constitutional Convention, which is some people refer to as the Convention of States. And but then the states can basically initiate and ratify the amendments without going through Congress. And of course, the other one is, of course, being initiated by Congress and then sent out to the states for ratification. So since Congress won't do their job and do some of the amendments that we need, then yes, I agree. I think that it's time for a convention, a constitutional convention, and have the states propose the amendments that we need. And if you take a look back at Cloward and Pivens in the 1966, I think is when they wrote their book. And then we take a look at, what was that other one? Another real popular, I forget what it's called. But anyhow, Cloward and Pivens talked about overwhelming the social welfare state to cause bankruptcy of the federal government. And then the other one was they wanted to, through anarchy, cause so much chaos that the people would seek a totalitarian government to come in and solve the anarchy and to solve all the disparate treatment of people, much like what we saw the summer of 2020, 2021, the summer of love. So that was one of those attempts, So yes, I wholeheartedly agree that when people get so frustrated, there's so much going on, and they feel that somebody has to take control, they're willing to turn it over to a totalitarian in order to have that control or a sense of security. Remember, Benjamin Franklin warned us about this, and he said, People who are willing to give up their freedom for security deserve neither. And that's basically the whole theory behind generating chaos in order to bring in a totalitarian government to restore order. And that will take away all of your rights. So Triple G, one of the things that we have to remember, and most people don't realize this, is we are still technically at war with North Korea, and we have been. We never signed an armistice. All we have is a ceasefire. So the UN declaration against North Korea in 1950 still stands. That we are only in a ceasefire. We never had an armistice or a peace treaty or a surrender or a capitulation or anything else by either side. It is officially a ceasefire, but we are still at an active state of war, which is why you get a Korean ribbon when you serve in Korea, okay? Because it's still considered a war zone. So my lottery purchases. Okay, everybody, we're at an hour and a minute. Thank you so much for being here. We'll be back next week. We'll talk about the 16th through the 20th Amendments. And gosh, I just hope we can come back next week. Remember, we're all in this together, so we can come out the other side together. Please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other, because togetherness is the key. And let's get Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26 out here. So the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. And the Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. So Triple G, we need to get together. We got to find out, what are we going to do to keep both of us warm, especially this coming weekend. Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, we've got chapter 1, basically, of Grid Down. What happens with an EMP strike against North America. Take care, everybody. Stay warm. Stay safe. Bye-bye. Finally got rid of all my notifications so I can reach the end stream button.